Okay, we are live on channel 18.
Sarah Eaton, thank you very much. Welcome, everyone. My name is Kevin Galligan, Chair of the Orleans Select Board. Today is Tuesday, January 12th, 2021. This is a joint meeting of the Select Board, Affordable Housing Trust Fund Board, and the Affordable Housing Committee. And a big welcome to everyone in attendance, everyone listening, everyone participating, including the expertise of the Barrett Consulting Group, Planning Group, Judy Barrett and her team that she'll introduce. But I do want to call the Select Board meeting to order. The respective other committees will do the same, and I'll just go around the room to, by roll call, ask for a say of yes, I'm here from Andrea Reed.
Yes, I'm here.
Matt Runyon.
Me too.
Cecil Newcomb.
Here.
Mark Matheson.
Yes.
And Nancy, turning it over to you.
Yes, I call the Affordable Housing Committee meeting to order. Say if you're here, Fran McClellan. She's here. We hear. Shelley Reynolds.
Here.
Rich Kendall.
Here.
Bill Stockert.
Here.
And Nancy Wren. And Fran McClellan. I see her on the screen on the participants.
I know she's there on the screen.
Nancy, her hand went up. She's here.
Oh, okay, thank you.
All right, moving into trust members, Alan McLennan is present. Dewey Landreth is present, I know. Ward
Yeah,
Gorey,
he's listening in on phone.
yeah, Ward Gorey,
We're good, present.
Matt Cole,
Here.
Alexis Matheson.
Here.
Henry Brem
Present.
and Andrea Reed.
Here.
And Katie Colecci Wibby is not here. She has a new child and is busy, she says. So Kevin, back to you.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Mr. Chair. Just a quick few points of introduction before I turn it over to George and then to Judy Barrett and her team. As folks will remember, we kicked off the feasibility study back on December 10th. And we are here with lots of information to share and continued feedback as you'll be asked to provide over the coming days. And I just want to set the stage for where we have been, where we're going. Where we've been is, as folks will remember, the Ross family approached the town of Orleans, the operators, owners of the Governor Prence Motel, to say, would the town be interested in acquiring this parcel? And of course, the town said, wow, thank you for coming to us. We appreciate that. We moved very quickly. By October 21st, we had executed a letter of intent. From there, that was subject to the special town meeting vote, that we received strong support from the town meeting to proceed to the next step, that was the purchase and sale. We executed that amicably on December 9th. And here we are. We're kicking off the feasibility study, thanks to the Barrett Group, that occurred on December 10th. I just would remind folks, if you do go on the Select Board website, there is a tab to the Governor Prence feasibility activities, including the survey you completed. But we are in what's referred to as the due diligence phase of this project. Paragraph 9 of the purchase and sale gives us by March 15th to elect to proceed, again, subject to town meeting in the spring, with the acquisition of this parcel. If town meeting does approve this, we will be able to close and acquire this property by July 15th. However, at the Ross family's option, if they elect to continue to operate for the summer, then we would not close until September 15th of 2021. So we're on a tight time frame, but thanks to the expertise of not only staff, George Meservy and Judy Barrett and the team, we are accomplishing great work to fully evaluate this option. And I really look forward to today. George, turn it over to you.
Hi, thanks, Kevin. I won't take up a ton of your time. You can hear me all right, correct?
Loud and clear.
Good, thanks. I just want to brief you on what's occurred since December 10th. That was the kickoff meeting at which your boards were all present. Primarily, Barrett Consulting has been engaged in a lot of research, data research. They have contacted each of the stakeholders that we identified at that last meeting and done some interviews. You'll hear the results of a public input survey, which the last number I heard was there was something like 500 responses to this survey. So that says to me that this is an important project, an important piece of property for the whole town. I believe they have an engineer on site and they've applied their planning expertise to the program. And they're otherwise on their way to fulfilling all of the contract tasks. As you recall, this is a quick study. This is we have until January 29th for the study to be completed. And then the town and the select board and the other two boards have until that March 15th date to consider whether they want to move forward and with what. So there's been a lot of research done. I don't want to take up any more time because I think we're going to have a packed presentation here and we want to allow a lot of time for Q&A. So I think with that, there's nothing else I need to bring forward right now. And I've turned it over to Judy, and thank you for doing all this work so fast.
So thank you very much. We do have a presentation for you. I know that the Q&A is up and I would encourage people as we go forward. If you have questions or comments, you can put them in the Q&A, which should be accessible at the bottom of your screen. And we may stop periodically and kind of take a look at what's there if there are questions, or we may hold them till the end. We'll just sort of see how this goes. But that is the plan. So let me kind of introduce us and where we are with the project and, give you kind of a status report on what we've done. So first of all, whoops. Yeah, there we go. I didn't mean to click that so quickly. Sorry, folks. So I want to talk about, who we are, of course, and share with you what we've learned. There are some things we still need to know. We're going to ask you some questions and show you kind of our sense of the site. My colleague, Brad Lipinski, who's on this, Bart Lipinski, excuse me, who's on this meeting with me, will kind of take over at some point to talk about the site tour and our thoughts on perhaps what might be done there. Catherine Dennison is also on this call. So we'll go forward. We are, of course, working with the Select Board, the Housing Trust, the Housing Committee, and George. Everybody's been incredibly helpful to us, and we really appreciate it. As I said, there are two of us on this call this evening, from my firm, myself and Catherine. There's a third person who's been working on this project, Tyler Marin, who's in another meeting tonight with Nantucket. And then we have Bart Lipinski from Grady Consulting, who has done an amazing job trying to pull together his thoughts about the site and some possibilities for it. You're going to see some concept drawings a little bit later that are still kind of evolving. So we don't want everybody rushing out and saying, oh my God, can't wait till you see what they're going to do with this property. But I want you to know we have thought about it and we have kind of looked at the site to think about what possibilities do exist there. So this is clicking a little bit faster than I want it to. So we have a scope. We have a pretty defined contract that we need to complete, as George said, by the 29th of January. And that started with meeting with town officials back in December to make sure we're all on the same page about what the study was to consist of and what we needed to do. And of course, this deadline, which looms large, of January 29th. We were asked to kind of look at the housing needs in Orleans, based largely on the housing plan that Karen Sonneborg worked on with you a couple of years ago, which is a very thorough plan. There's a lot of information in it. And we're kind of relying heavily on that to understand the needs in your community, although not exclusively that plan, but largely. Look at what's happening in the region in terms of housing development and housing sales and housing rents. And a lot of the places that we work have the housing market has taken off since mid-March. I think largely in response to what's been happening with the pandemic. So we want to understand kind of where things are in your part of the Cape, which is not necessarily the same as perhaps some other regions of the Cape. So we're still gathering some of that information to take a look at. Our scope also calls for looking at the land, just looking at the land and what would be needed for perhaps housing that might make the most sense for this site, and how that might be arranged on the property, and also to look at the existing buildings on the property to determine, what can be saved, what can be worked with, what might it take to sort of bring those buildings to code, and use all or some of them as part of a redevelopment scenario for the property. We've also been asked to consider whether there might be some other uses that would work on the site, in addition to housing. And you're going to see some of that in this presentation as we go on, because we've tried to get at some questions about that and understand what the other kinds of needs are in the community and how people feel about those. Estimating the impacts of a proposed development or a proposed reuse scenario on sewer and noise and, just general kind of project impacts on the town. Take in public input, which is part of what we're doing this evening, following up also on a survey that we conducted, which George referred to earlier. And I can give you some more information about the response to that momentarily. And then present some draft findings at a public meeting, which I think is probably for early February, if I'm not mistaken. But we have to get you our report by the end of this month. So we are working away at this, pretty fast here and pretty intensively. But before I go on, we have a few questions for you. It's always helpful to us to kind of know who's in the meeting and maybe give us a little bit of sense of some of the demographics of our attendees, so that might kind of help us understand the answers that we get to some questions. So Sarah, I'm going to rely on you to launch the poll. Do you live in Orleans?
Okay, the poll is active, so anybody can take it.
Actually, we have 2 questions. Are all the questions up right now, Sarah?
Yeah, all the questions are on the same poll.
Oh, all right. Okay, good. That will help to expedite moving through some other slides in a few minutes.
We've already done this survey. Do you want us to do it again, or will we throw off statistics if we do it again?
No, we want to know who's in the meeting tonight.
Okay.
Thank you for asking. Sarah, I'm going to rely on you to let me know when the poll is ready to close.
Okay, yeah.
Okay. So we have pretty much everyone, all but one person is a year-round resident of the town. And let's see. And most folks participating in the meeting tonight are in my age demographic, 65 or over. We do have some folks who are younger, which is great. Actually, we're happy to have all of you joining this meeting tonight. We were curious to know how many of people joining the meeting might be a member of a town board or commission, and that's a question that was not on the online survey, but wanted to get a sense of how many people might be signing in this evening who are just interested residents and not necessarily involved in some direct way on a town board. It looks like most people this evening responded to the online survey that we did. And then we also were curious to know how many of you are regular town meeting goers. So, and it looks like most of you are, again, but 2. So thank you. That gives us a pretty good picture of who is participating with us tonight. So the next
Judy,
couple of, yes?
Can I just jump in? Only because
Oh,
I
yeah.
saw a Q&A come in from one individual that the submit was not working, but I believe that's panelists were not able to check and participate in the poll, but attendees are. So Sarah, I think if you have the ability to let everyone click the boxes on the poll, or if somebody wants to move over as an attendee, they could participate in future polls.
I let it where participants could take part in the poll.
Okay, great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay to move on then, Kevin?
Please do.
Okay, super. Thank you. So these next couple of slides, of course, I thought we were going to do the polls individually, but it's fine. You've answered all my questions, so we're going to just move on. So let me tell you a little bit about what we have kind of seen or heard so far. Sarah, can you close the poll?
Yes, I closed the poll.
Okay, because it looks like it's still showing up on my end. Whatever, it's gone. What have we heard and what have we learned so far? A lot. So we looked at your housing plan and in an attempt to understand what the community needs are that might be met by housing on this site or any other site. I apologize for these continuing to flip like this. It wasn't my intention. So as you can see, in your existing housing plan, you have a number of people who are living in units that are lower moderate income folks for whom the rents are not necessarily affordable because the units they're living in are not priced for their needs. And that is something that we would typically look at in a study like this to understand kind of what is the overall deficit in the community. And according to your housing plan, among renters anyway, people who are living in rental housing in Orleans, there's currently a deficit of about 274 units. So that's people who are lower moderate income or even up to 100% of what would be called the median income, who are living in housing they can't afford because there's not enough housing to meet their needs. The plan also talks about a similar kind of deficit for homeowners, and that is a fairly significant deficit. There are not many units affordable to people whose incomes are at or below 80% of area median income, which is a standard many of you may be familiar with. It is sort of the highest income threshold for units that are eligible for the Chapter 40B subsidized housing inventory. But then, of course, there are also people who have incomes that are somewhat higher than that, for whom the housing market may also still be producing units that are unaffordable. So when you look at the total of people who are lower moderate income and people who are even somewhat above that, and compared with the number of units that are actually affordable, there's a pretty significant deficit. So it seems as there's a fairly significant home ownership need in the community as well. And we need to think about these things because clearly if we're going to make suggestions to the town about what kind of housing options might make sense on the site, we're going to want to think about what are these income tiers, what's affordable to them, and what kind of pricing would that mean? Is it possible for a developer to kind of meet those needs with or without some kind of subsidy? How does all that work? And again, this is just another way of looking at the needs in the community. People who are lower moderate income, who are seniors, who are families, who are non-elderly individuals, but just how many of them actually are paying more for housing than they really can afford. So there seems to be a fairly significant affordability need in your community. Not surprisingly, a preponderance of that need tends to fall below the 80% of area median income level. That is not at all surprise. We tend to see that almost everywhere. But there are needs in your community also even above that 80%. And again, I'm not surprised to see that either. We do a lot of work in other towns on the Cape, and this isn't the first time we've seen statistics like this. So I think that the upshot is that again, we've done that poll already. The upshot of it is that there's an affordable housing need to be met in the community, and it looks as though this site may be able to participate in some way and in helping to address those needs. So then we looked at the library because it was one of the things we were asked to consider is, there are other community needs besides housing, and can any of these work on the site? So we tried to understand and educate ourselves a bit about the situation with your library. And so we looked at a recent, some recent data from the library to understand where things stand. The library has well-defined priorities to encourage people to read, to view, and listen for pleasure. And a library, of course, in most communities does a lot to meet those kinds of needs. To be a comfortable place where people can go and interact with each other, but also read quietly and have kind of open spaces where they can network or carry on, whatever kind of quiet time activities they would be interested in doing. And then also to encourage lifelong learning. These are pretty fundamental objectives of most public libraries today. So I don't think your library is particularly out of sync with any other public libraries we are familiar with. According to data that we were able to obtain about your library, you have a lot of items, although not all of them are clearly physically held in the facility. And that's because people can access resources in other libraries and so forth through yours. But you have about 9,300 registered borrowers in your library, and a lot of things were in circulation in 2018, which is the most recent year for which we have data. Close to 150,000 in terms of all formats, things that were in circulation through the Snow Library in Orleans. You also have a lot of community groups that use your library. This again is fairly typical. A lot of the newer libraries that are built in Massachusetts today provide for community meeting rooms. There's space for the public to be able to do other things. Community groups can lease rooms or simply sign up for them. It does a number of things. One, it provides meeting space that in many communities is really at a premium. And another is to encourage people to come to the library and to see the library as a place that's more than just what many people might associate a library with, which is checking out books. So meeting space, in use in the library is something that happens in your community, and probably would even happen more if there was more space, but it's certainly happening now. Your library also offers a lot of programs for children, which is impressive, 650 programs with about 15,000 attendees. Of course, those are duplicated counts, but that's a lot of kids and a lot of programs. So, so good for your library. The facility, as we understand it, was built in 1954. That's a year after I was born, by the way, just a little factoid. The original facility was built in 1877 and destroyed by a fire the year before I was born. The current layout reflects additions that were constructed in 1977 and 1992. As we understand it, the sort of expected remaining life of the current building is about 8 to 12 years. And there would probably need to be substantial structural work, including bringing the library fully up to current code requirements, if much was done to the existing building to improve it. While it complies with Americans with Disability Act standards, it needs more. It doesn't necessarily meet all of today's requirements, doesn't meet fire safety standards, et cetera. And the Crane meeting room was not really built as a meeting space, so it doesn't really meet code requirements either. But nonetheless, these spaces are being used. So it seems to us, just based on what we've heard and learned and read, that there are needs that perhaps this site could address some of. And we make no claim that it will or should. We're just reporting to you what we've learned. There seems to be, as you'll see in a minute from the survey, a lot of interest in a community center. We're aware of this facility. We don't know a whole lot about it, but we do know it exists. It's in your cultural district. It's a cute building. And there appears to be a lot of interest in maybe being able to do more. So this building is used a lot. It provides, I guess, really space for quite a number of activities. But what we're learning from the survey and what we've learned from just interviewing people, Catherine Dennison, my colleague, must have talked to many, many people in an interview process that preceded the survey. There just seemed to be a lot of interest in perhaps having a more permanent type of community center. And again, that is something that perhaps this site could address. Those are decisions you folks have to make. We're your advisors. And you already answered that question as well. So as you know, most of you, all of you, we conducted a community survey starting at the end of December up until this past Monday. And we asked a number of questions. Some of them were demographics, such as questions you were asked at the beginning of this meeting. but also trying to get a sense of kind of what people know, what people think about the needs are in the community, how much of those needs maybe are sort of town-wide issues versus things that might be specific to the downtown area, or simply not needs at all. And so the takeaways from one of the questions that we asked about this sort of list of community needs, the highest priority items that came out, this happens on every survey I work on Cape Cod, by the way, the highest priority need is always employment. And we included that question because we thought it was important, but these were the needs that people most frequently identified as significant priorities for the town, which was employment, affordable housing, a wider range of housing types that would be available, and then recreation options. So those were the things that people commented on the most frequently. We asked specifically about potential uses for this site. And some people really had a lot to say about significant priorities. There were things that tended to fall kind of to the bottom of the list, at least with this survey. And, you know, I guess I want to just make it clear, we don't do surveys like this to sort of get hard statistical data because it's not a scientific survey. What it is an opportunity for people to participate and tell us what they think. So we're considering these responses. They're not scientific, but I mean, I guess I will be looking to you folks for some input on how these answers kind of mesh with what you know about the town. So the highest priorities identified in that question were affordable housing and a community center. And the lowest priorities for use of the site were a fire station, commercial space, the library, or healthcare services. Some people were also given the option to not say whether they thought something was important or not important, but just did they need more information. And some people identified commercial space or healthcare or recreational uses as things that they would probably want more information about. And I share that with you simply because sometimes when we're working on a study like this, with a very active group such as you have assembled for this project, the people who are closest to it know a lot of information. They just know a lot about the site. They know a lot about the project. They know a lot about community needs because they're dealing with town government all the time. But not everybody out there in the community has as much information. So sometimes it's important to know, gee, if you thought that perhaps the site would be great for commercial space, an answer like this might tell you that, well, if we think that, perhaps we need to think about what the public education program needs to be, so people understand why we're making these proposals. So I thought that might be helpful to some of you to see. We then asked, you know, here's like some potential opportunities if the town decides to acquire the site. And most of the charts, by the way, were just too big to put on these slides, but this one I thought I would try to include. The green bands, in case the text on the slide is too small to read, the green band identifies things that respondents thought really should be considered if the town were to acquire the property. So anything that's a green band that's showing up there is really, it was important to the survey respondents. The red is, I don't think we should consider this. The yellow is, or gold, depending upon how that color shows up on your computer screen, is I need more information. And then the smallest, the sort of pink colored ones are, I don't think the town should acquire the property at all. So we asked that question just to give people the opportunity, but I think you can clearly kind of see in this, the recreational use and housing options really kind of rise to the top. And the fire station and commercial space and library, you know, tended to get the largest response of I don't think we should be doing this. So it's just another way to think about the information I gave you on the previous slide. So I'm going to ask Bart to kind of take over here and talk about the site and his impressions of it when he and Tyler, my colleague, walked it last week.
Okay, hi, everybody can hear me okay?
Yep.
All right, so last Thursday, Tyler and myself, we were able to get out to the site. We walked around the perimeter, the bike path, up and down 6A. We looked at the way the contours slope basically down towards 6A or back down towards the bike path in the back. We looked at from the exterior. We weren't able to get inside the buildings last Thursday, but we looked at the conditions of the exteriors to see what we thought could be used or in most cases not really used. The buildings are older. They all have block foundations. Some of them had cracks. A big part of the lower part of the site, that would be the half along the bike path, is in the shade. So there was a lot of moss and roofs covered and stuff like that. So that could be potential issues. But so I think most people know where this site is. 6A, right at the across from the Christmas tree shop there, and along the bike path.
Do you want me to
Let's
go to the
see.
next?
So,
Do you want to go to the next
yep, we
slide?
could probably go to the next slide. So this is an overview. Some of the pictures that were taken, the uses, zones, all that stuff. Next slide.
If I could just add before we go there, part of what we always do in any project like this is try to do an existing land use map just to understand what is around the site. So that map that you see, the red parcels, this is an assessor's parcel map. And the red parcels are properties that are in some kind of commercial use according to the assessor's data. All that yellow that you see, it's different types of housing. There's some purple in there that's an industrial use. The blue blotches that you see, those are parcels that are in some kind of institutional use. So just to give you some context, we look at this because we're trying to figure out kind of what is the position of this property in relation to the land uses around it, and the the size of the properties and so forth. So that's what the map is. And then the picture map is really, we tried to plot all the places where we took pictures, some of which you're going to see on the next slide.
Okay, so these are some of the pictures we took last Thursday. I'll just kind of go through them real quick, but basically top left is in the middle of the site, looking back at one of the buildings. We could see that there are a lot of stairs and grade changes throughout the site. The bottom picture, bottom left, would be looking north up 6A. I think that's north. Across the front of the property. The big picture in the center is down near the bike path in the back. You could see some of the moss and everything that's kind of actually growing right over the asphalt and everything there. Top right photo would be the front of the hotel, and that would be, again, looking more towards north. 6A would be to your right. And then the bottom photo, you could see there, again, more steps, walls that are kind of falling apart. That photo there is down at the rear of the property, in front of I don't know what the building numbers are, but that's the one building that is closest to the bike path. So we're basically looking towards 6A in that photo up the hill, and that's the main building up top there.
Next slide, Bart.
Go then. Yep, next slide. So here we'll walk through a couple concepts, and again, these are just ideas at the moment. So this first concept that we have here is somewhat of a mixed use concept. So you can see along 6A, we would have some sort of two-story type building. Lower floor would be commercial, offices, etc. We probably have about 9,000 square foot with this concept here, and then second floor would be, again, 9,000 square foot, which would probably be somewhere in the range of 12 to 15 or so apartments. And then the back half of the site, we tried to put a smaller cottage type concept there, where we would have the front of the buildings all facing each other. So we would have walkways and pathways throughout the site. The backs of the houses would actually be, where on the street side. Because of the grade in these situations, some of these houses might be kind of a walkout where you would walk in in most cases on the second floor, and then you could go downstairs and walk out the first floor because of the way the grading works. But again, in this case, commercial apartments towards the front, connect to the bike path. I think that's a great opportunity there for people to just walk right up to the town center without having to go out towards 6A or ride their bikes. Again, we have plenty of circulation in and around the site for people to walk or get out to the buildings at the front. So that would be a mixed use concept there. Next slide. So in this one, we again did something a little bit similar, but we went strictly with cottage type homes. So in this case, we were able to get more in because we don't have buildings and apartments and as much parking. But we did want to add some sort of a amenity building to this one. So that would be the larger building in the center. And that could possibly be used for town events or meetings space or something similar to that. Again, with this concept, we have plenty of circulation around the perimeter of the property, throughout the property, and then again to connect to the rail trail, and then back to the sidewalks up at 6A. We do have a third concept, which we don't have ready. I apologize for that, but in our third concept, we did, or we are preparing one that would have possibly a library or community center, playgrounds, reading gardens, memorials. We're trying to figure out how to get some of the residential components into that as well. So hopefully at some point within the next day, we'll have that concept together, and I'm sure it'll be sent to everybody. But again, we thought that this is a great spot for three totally different ideas. But because of the way it's placed with the access to the rail trail, we just thought it would be a great place for a community or a residential for the most part. But then again, it could be used more as a town situation with a library, again, playgrounds and building on the community center, which seems to be a good idea now, maybe just something bigger. But again, that was the two that we had for you. Again, mostly residential, but we think it's a great spot with the connections to the center of town. So whatever we can do there, I think it would be a great opportunity to really connect a few important parts of the town within walking distance.
Super, thank you.
Judy, this is Kevin. Could I ask Bart one quick question? I think others might have the same on that one. So Bart, when you did the site visit, if you look at the very southwest, what is boxed in as a rectangular vacant space on this plan, that is also included as part of our purchase and sale for consideration. It's currently a small gallery. Did you assess that, or are there thoughts?
We looked at it. I didn't realize that was actually a part of the property, so we could definitely, when we update these, we could definitely include that in there, and
That's
that
my
gives us the opportunity.
That's fine, no worries.
Well, it just,
sorry.
it's always better to have more space than to have less, so that's a good issue.
Okay. Thank you for doing that. So I think at this point, I imagine that there are some questions in the Q&A, which at this point I can't quite see yet, but I'm sure Catherine probably can. I didn't mean to do that. here. And also, Sarah, can you give me a sense of how many people are actually in the attendance side of the meeting?
Yeah, we have 13 people in attendance, 14, one person's on phone call, and that's Dewey.
Okay. I think that we can go ahead and maybe open it up and let everybody join as a panelist. I think that would be a good idea. It's not so large a group that it would be unwieldy.
Okay.
But meanwhile, Catherine, are there questions there in Q&A that perhaps we should take a look at and make sure you unmute before you try to read them?
So, all right. So there's the first couple of comments respond to the initial question that we asked, what would you like to see? And we have, I'd like to see mixed use, housing and business, arts and services that attract people to Orleans. We have mixed income housing and possible second community use. We have multi-use housing, potentially keep the motel in front or use as a small, inexpensive offices and art studios at the street edge, a cultural center building with an educational component like art classes. Let's see what else we have here. We had a question about the poll not working. Glad we got that one resolved. The next one, will you please consider the additional use / option layout of a new hotel on the site, say 2 to 3 stories, 50 to 75 rooms for extended stay or limited service major brand? And the last one is a question for Bart. Wondering if you could tell us the number of units in both of those designs. I think you mentioned 14 to 15 apartments in design 1, but I didn't hear an overall total for either.
Okay, that's easy. So in the mixed use, we had approximately 30 single family homes. And then depending on the size of the apartments, possibly 12 or so more. In the residential one, the one that had strictly single family, we had 49 homes over 5.5 acres. So we're just below 10 units, dwelling units per acre. And I believe we're allowed to go to 14. So we're well under the maximum numbers that we're allowed. So just to re-answer that, the residential, we were at about 49. The mixed use, we were probably in the areas of about 42.
Thank you. That's actually all we have in the Q&A so far.
Super, that's great. Thank you. I guess I'd like to throw a question out to all of you. I mean, did you hear anything from, admittedly, we didn't give you all the survey results, but we kind of gave you some high points. Did you hear anything that surprised you? Anybody? Shelley, I see you shaking your head. Nobody heard any surprises?
I'm surprised that there was feedback on needing more employment.
Really? So I can only tell you, every time I've worked on a project on the Cape in any town, that always comes up, and that was why we included it in the survey. It just seems to come up a lot. So I think often people are kind of conscious of how hard it can be to find employment on the Cape that's sufficient, in the wage structure to support the cost of housing. I think that's why that tends to come up.
As an employer, we need more employees and need housing to house them.
Yeah. Understood. Ward? I'm just going to pick on people as I see hands up. Yes, Ward?
Thank you. I was curious about the category that was, I don't think the town should purchase the property, which was spread out across that multicolored bar chart. Would I be interpreting it correct to say that it was 15, 20% of town respondents thought that?
I would say if you actually, the way that question was set up on the screen was probably not as helpful to you as it could be, but there weren't that many respondents. I actually can just check that question right now and I can tell you exactly what it was. It was not a lot. I think that what happened is that people were looking at each category of use and saying, I don't think we should buy it for this. I don't think we should buy it
Yeah,
for
I
that.
remember the question.
Yeah, but if you just hold on 1 second, I can tell you. Yeah, I would say it was probably about, I'm just giving you round numbers here, about 70 people out of the 700 or so who responded consistently said, we don't think you should buy the property. So it wasn't that many respondents. It's just that the same people tended to say that about each use.
So around 10%.
Yeah, I would say about 10% of the total respondents. We'll calculate that more carefully and put it in the report, but I felt like we had to give people that option to comment on that.
I agree.
You know, we also, yes, Shelley, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Finished. I have a couple of questions if you're finished, that's all.
Sure, go right ahead.
Okay, one has to do with the parking for either of the plans that were presented. Is that figured in somewhere? And if so, how many spaces did you figure? And the second one has to do with the pool that's there and whether there's any possibility of its being used for recreational purposes for the community.
I could answer that. So in both concepts, all the residential houses had at least 2 parking spaces. And then we typically try to get some overflow parking in areas around the site. The mixed use, we really don't know what's going on there yet, but we did have plenty of parking. I don't recall the total number of parking there yet. But with typically with the bylaws, there'll be a required amount of parking for residential homes, for whatever commercial space or office space is there, and for the apartment. So whatever happens, there'll be a required number that we'll have to meet. So there will be plenty of parking for whatever is proposed or ends up being proposed.
So Bart, may I just follow up on that though? That assumes that whole housing mix was essentially cottages, yes? Except for the apartments on the above the commercial.
Yeah, so you're right. We did single family homes. We really didn't get into, you know, the possibility of townhomes or things like that. But typically, you know, there's always a requirement for parking. So whether it's a townhome, a house, or an office, a restaurant, they all have different requirements, but then we have to figure out how to get them all to fit and to work.
I ask only because possibly parking requirements might be somewhat different if we had a mix of housing types, or do you disagree? It's the planner.
I don't know.
Help myself.
Yeah. I don't know what it is in Orleans. I didn't get to that point yet, but typically it's either a resident has to have, you know, sufficient enough apartments. They vary from town to town, but it could be per bedroom. A restaurant would be tables. Offices would be square foot, commercial would be square foot. So it all depends on what end, you know. A part of our job is to figure out how to propose something and then have it actually work, because we wouldn't want to propose a great idea that everybody loves and then not be able to fit the parking in. So it's a big part of it, a big part of the planning and the designs. And, you know, for concepts now, we're a little bit aware of it, but we want to make sure we can come up with some ideas and give everybody a really good idea of what we think could happen in this spot. So
that's fine. So Andrea, I think you had a question, and then go ahead. Andrea, you're next.
Well, it's actually to about your experience doing this in other communities. I know that the impacts of different kinds of uses next to housing or around housing or in the middle of housing, it tends to, for that neighborhood to develop differently, right? So if you put a library or a community center that has active recreation and maybe some outside recreation uses versus commercial on one floor with living above. Do you have any feel from your experience working with other communities, what are really good fits, whether we've got cottages or townhomes of the other uses next to this intensity of a residential use?
Well, I will say this, wherever you put an elementary school, there will be housing. I live in a town on the South Shore, and I'm old enough to remember when the current K through 2 building, which is really a little kid's school, was built. And this was the early 70s. And it was farmland out there. And within 5 years, it was not farmland anymore. It was just, subdivision after subdivision of single family homes. I mean, people with children want to be near a school. A few years back, when the town of Westford built a new elementary school, they actually provided, as part of the site plan for that project, they provided for some affordable housing on the property, because they knew that people were want to be in a situation where perhaps if they don't have transportation, their kids can easily walk to school. So, I think school uses just tend to do that. There is a wonderful example in Melrose, and I know that some of these towns aren't like you, but this is an interesting story. Melrose has a community center in their downtown. And it is an amazing experience to go into that downtown and see what happens every time there's a programmatic break in the afternoon and families come pouring out of that building, and they don't get in their cars and leave. They walk down the street to the ice cream shop, to the candy shop or whatever. And so they stay in the downtown. So I've just seen kind of some commercial, retail, restaurant, food service benefits from that kind of use that attracts a lot of people. And when they come rushing out of the community center, they want something to do. So there are these nice synergies that, that can happen. I mean, that's probably not a complete answer to your question, but yes, there are definitely relationships you want to think about.
Judy, we've got a couple questions in the chat.
Okay, can I take Mefford Runyon first, and then we'll take the. Yes, go ahead.
I just wanted to comment on two things: the commercial use element and the community center. The town is filled with vacant, commercial space, and there's a redevelopment project, a fairly large one, expected to happen once the sewering is completed. So the demand and the need for commercial space, I don't personally see it. But the mixed use, when you start talking about a building that could be a combination of things. Now I'll just get into the community center. I think that a building could be a lot of things, including a community center. But the way space gets transformed from one thing to another these days, you can have an event venue, you can have recreation, you can have big meeting space. The town could have its town meeting there possibly, although the parking might not be adequate. But rather than use the term community center, I think it'd be good for people to realize that when they think of one use, it could be a lot of different uses. And so a lot of people's desires can be met just with one building.
Mm-hmm. Well said. Thank you. Thank you. Catherine, did you want to go to those questions or comments that were in the chat?
Yeah, absolutely. First, hi, I have a question on the designs and parking for use by the community. And parking for use by the community. What would the community, where would the community park if there is a town activity?
Well, let's see. So that would be the residential concept. We had somewhat of an amenity building, and I probably wasn't specific, but I meant more of a community building for that neighborhood or that the property. So it might not be a amenity area for town events, but it would be you know, for anything, you know, with all the residents of that development. So in the second part of that would be they would walk there, so they wouldn't have to drive or have parking.
Great, thanks. The next question was, what distribution of bedrooms does each of your plans envision?
Oh boy, I'm getting all of them. So
That's what you're here
typically
for.
cottages. So typically these are cottages or smaller homes. You know, they're in the 1,200 square foot. So in most cases, they're single bedrooms. Some might have a second bedroom if they have company or things like that. But they're small. They're not, you know, 2,000 or 3,000 square foot homes. They're cottages. They're close together. That's why we try to have the fronts facing each other with walkways as opposed to streets, so that people could go out and see their neighbors without crossing streets, and then all the car traffic is, you know, on the opposite side. So they would all the driveways would be abut each other, and then all the fronts would abut each other. So again, you know, two car parking, or one bedroom or 2 bedroom, we should have plenty of parking. And again, these are concepts, so we try to keep some of these things in mind without really taking too much time to design things yet, because we don't know what the community will want to see or the town will want to see. So again, you know, the concepts are just to say, look, we took a look at these things, and these are some of the things that we could think could happen here.
George, I see your hand up.
Thank you. I love one of the takeaways from this meeting already is that we had 700 responses to a survey, and the 2 highest, most popular future uses are housing and community center. If I were designing the site, I think I'd look at the most intensive land use first. And we're kind of at a disadvantage because the town hasn't really done any feasibility study on what a community center for Orleans is like. What is it? Is it as big as the one downtown now, or is it as big as Harwich's? So I wonder, and you know, maybe we reserve land, but I wonder, Judy, if you've have any thoughts on how much land, since the town hasn't even decided to put in a community center, if we wanted to reserve land for a future use out on 6A, how much land should we reserve? So how do we figure out what those concepts are?
You mean if you say you acquired the site and you decided to go ahead with some housing first toward the back, but then reserve, basically land bank part of the site for a future community
For
center?
some future use, which might be a community center, might not be.
Yeah, and I don't know the answer to that right now. I will be able to answer it for you. I mean, to some extent, it depends on how big the community center is going to be, but which I think is something that we need to talk about a little bit more, is just like, you know, how much space are we talking about here? But I don't know, Bart, if you have any thoughts about that, jump in. But it seems to me as though certainly there's enough land here, George, that if you wanted to, if you had a multi-purpose use scenario in mind, and you want to do part of it now and bank part of it later, that's certainly plausible to do. It's just a question of how big that community center would be and what other amenities are associated with it. Bart, do you want to add to that at all, or do you?
No, I think, you know, once we get that last concept together, you know, I think that'll give everybody a pretty good range of, you know, what could actually happen here. So, you know, we were only able to show you some of the mixed use and residential, but I think, you know, the last concept that we're working on, it could be a community center and library together. So, you know, now you have one building and it's used for multiple different things. So whether it's finding out what's going on or going to the library, programs, all that stuff, you know, with the way if we were to go with, you know, with a community or library type design there, you know, we have the opportunities for playgrounds, and with the way the grade slopes down in the back, maybe even like some sort of an amphitheater or something where we could have music or events or things out on a lawn area. Then we have to think again, and we talked about this before, if we're going to be drawing a lot of people, then we got to have parking. So now the site starts to get small real fast. So I think, knowing, having these surveys and seeing what people would like to see is a great place to figure what should go there. And then, the concepts, we put these together to give you guys an example of what it could look like. And I think, hopefully by tomorrow we should have that last one, and then everybody can look at all three, and then, maybe, ideas begin to change a little bit. So, and I see a lot of hands.
I do. So I think Alan was up first and then Kevin. Is that okay if I go in that order?
Sure.
Alan, you're on mute.
You're on mute, Alan.
I got it.
Good.
Just a thought. What you've presented to us is somewhere in the range of 45 housing units plus or minus in the two schemes, without getting into specific numbers. And what you have shown is housing that consumes a lot of land. And when you're dealing with individual units, which we need to think about, you are also building 4 walls for every unit. And you're consuming side yards for parking and so forth. And I would think that you might want to say, okay, we know that we can be at about 15 dwelling units per acre. What would happen if we took those 40 or 45 units and put them in a building, which we could place wherever we wanted to on the site, and create some efficiencies? Still same unit size, maybe townhomes, all sorts of different things. I don't want to get into that. But I think what you end up with now in the housing scheme is you have one dwelling unit of 1,100 to 1,200 square feet on about 5,324 square feet. Now, I think that's great. My wife and I owned a house like that and raised our kids that way, and it's spectacular. But we're talking about a site of 5.5 acres that has competing uses. And I think we need to move into some physical arrangements that take advantage of the space that we have. And just throw it out. Let's say we use 3 acres on the backside for housing attached in some way, and we have a community center out front in 2 acres plus or minus. So I think you play with that a little bit, and it might work to our advantage and to the cost as well.
Yep. Understood. These are preliminary thoughts that we.
I understand that.
And I appreciate what you're saying.
Preliminary one.
Yep, that's fine, Alan. Thank you so much. Kevin, did you want to say something?
Just a quick one, Judy. I think you're seeing the smart people, including the attendees, that I know Catherine's going to get to further questions that have come in. But my thought too is, as we envision this, be sure that it's suitable for all of Orleans and all of the residents, so that it's not skewed more toward, someone that wants to downsize, that's in the more older demographic. But I think, when we see a rich, vibrant community, that means young people will walk out and, interact with older people, and a true neighborhood that's a mix. And I don't just mean a mix of single versus multifamily, but a true mix of a community that enriches itself because of old and young. And I think the design right now is a little simplistic. And again, you qualified it, understood, but there are a lot more ways we can enhance this.
Agreed. Thank you. Am I missing anybody else? Mark.
Thank you. I think there's a lot of
a lot of people in the town have expressed a desire for a community center. And I think in the graphics that you showed early on in the meeting, that was, along with housing, was one of the top priorities for usage of the space. And I think as a town, we're going to have to look at what point in time will we be willing to go forward and spend all the money that would be required to have a community center that can truly serve the needs of the community with the needs of recreation, as well as meeting spaces, as well as spaces for our young people in our older residents. I guess I get a little concerned in that years ago we had similar kinds of discussions about sewering, and we were talking about bringing vitality to our downtown and to our businesses, and that, you know, if we could revitalize the downtown and revitalize the businesses, you know, it's kind of like if you build it, they will come kind of thing. And I get a little nervous about looking at if we build a community center, then, you know, we're going to have all these people going to it when we've already decided in town that, you know, we don't have enough people living here year round to support our economy, that you know, there's the jobs or the people that fill those jobs all depend on housing. And so, you know, it's like putting the cart before the horse, that having a community center, Judy, you alluded to earlier, you know, when you build an elementary school, all of a sudden you have these houses go up all around it. Well, you build a community center and you use the land that you have for the community center, where are the houses going to go? Because our single acre, you know, zoning regulations in the rest of this town make it impossible to put in any more houses. And this was the spot that housing should be going because of the sewers, because of the ability to get downtown, the bike path, the zoning density that we've built into our downtown district. So how do we fit in the housing that we need? Because if we don't have the housing that we need, you know, the community center is going to be another mostly vacant building. So the two site plans that you showed, I think, as Alan said, you know, we need to get a little more sophisticated with that. I don't know if you had an opportunity to look at the Cape Cod Commission's study on downtown Orleans, and whether you tried to dovetail with any of that. But to me, I think the key to everything really is to have housing that young people and working people can afford to live in, so that they will be the year-round drivers of our economy. And if we don't take care of that component first, the other things are doomed to failure.
Thank you. Is there someone else who's, or Catherine, was there something in the chat or the Q&A that you wanted to bring to my attention?
There's a couple more questions in the chat. Some of them, you know, we've sort of touched upon since they were asked. Like, what do we say? What do we mean when we say community center? Do we want to revisit them at all, or move on to the next one?
So it's a good question. Actually, the towns I work in that have community centers have often come to that place because they had a deficient senior center that needed to be expanded or rebuilt, and a recreation department that had a number of space needs that were not met by the existing either facility or the facilities that they were spread out in all over town. And so the two groups kind of come together to think about, well, how could we perhaps have a space that meets a multiplicity of needs? And so the community centers that I've been in typically provide space for council on aging activities. Sometimes there are nonprofits that provide elder services that also come in and use that space. That the recreation, indoor recreation programs are often held principally in that space. There is often community space, just community meeting space I don't know about your town, but a lot of the towns I work in, there's never enough space for public meetings. And so when a community center is built, sometimes there's just these rooms that are made available for a variety of community purposes. And sometimes that need is addressed in a new library project too. So, but I would just say the community centers I've been in are multi-purpose public services for all ages. That's what I've seen. And the programming may be managed by the Selectman's office. It may be managed by Recreation Commission. It may be managed by a joint community center committee. It varies from town to town, but that's what I've seen. Alan, you have your.
I just want to remind everybody that there is a note here in the chat. On January 25th, between 5:30 and 7 p.m., the Orleans Citizen Forum is holding an open forum on community centers. And the forum is having representatives from other community centers come to Orleans to talk about what they do. So
right.
It'll be 2 or 3 days before your report is due, but nevertheless, January 25th, 5:30 p.m. It'll be on Channel 18 and it's open to anybody.
That's super. Thank you. Do you know what communities are going to be represented in that forum?
I know that Harwich is going to be there
Yeah.
at least, and I don't know the others.
Okay. So ironically, I've done a number of meetings in the Harwich Community Center or the Community Development Partnership or the Housing Corporation of Cape Cod. And another irony is that the architect who designed that building happens to be on the master plan committee of one of the communities I'm working in on the South Shore. So I am familiar with that building from a number of perspectives. Other questions or comments that we haven't gotten to? I can only see one part of the gallery view here. So if you're not right in my view, I would encourage you to use the raise hand feature because sometimes that'll kind of bring you right up to the very top row and we'll see you. Otherwise, I may not.
And Judy, I'm just going to pipe in. This is Kevin. I think if Catherine reads in, there's one really important comment that I think we do want to hear, and if she could share that.
Yeah, the next comment was that they were disappointed to see that neither of the design plans included family-friendly play spaces like a small playground, basketball court, or even much green space. Would love to see these worked into housing design if that's the direction that the town decides to go in.
I could answer that. So we are working on a third, and I think with some of the input today, that's going to help us get a little bit clearer on how to make that one work. But as mentioned, we do have a concept that we're working on that could be a library or a community center or both, and a lot of open features like playgrounds, reading gardens, amphitheater, and you know, hearing the comments today about getting that housing component in it, maybe we can alter that one to have more townhomes to raise that density a little bit without taking up so much space, and then give us the space to have open lawns and open areas, playgrounds and things like that. So we will have one. So, you know, whenever the next meeting on this is, or I'm sure they'll be up on the town's page shortly once we get them together, and everybody should be able to see them.
Judy, just one quick one if I could add to, and Bart, this is more for your background and info in terms of the dots you mapped in terms of your visit. If you were to stay on the bike trail and head north, you would come to an overpass bridge that would bring you to the vicinity of Putnam Farm. So this really is a nice connection to an area that does have community gardens. So from a standpoint of families and the desire to have victory gardens and stuff, this really is an ideal property to not have to have those on site, but people can quickly get on their bike and go down to tend their farm. So it's got a lot of amenities just by virtue of where it sits.
Andrea?
The other little piece of background information is that I know from the planning board and historic preservation and our design guidelines There's, I think, a new visual survey that's going to come in front of the planning board first, but I think we're open as a community to historic reference of larger structures, great manor houses, other things. It's been used with 107 Main in design consideration that might help with the playing out of open space or alternative uses in forms that are respectful of our history as a community. That, you know, just as a reference is, we wouldn't necessarily pull off an antebellum Southern large home, but we sure have a lot of sea captains' houses here that could fit into a community and still be used very differently inside, but the design would add value to the community in a different way. Whether it houses an art center or 4 apartments or, you know, condos, you're the designers. But I think that as a community, given the housing studies that George, was it Design Union or Alan, some of the other folks may know.
Studio. I think it was Union Studio.
Yes, the survey preferences. I think we're open to a wide range of considerations for your forward motion.
Thank you. I actually
I
have
have a question here.
Go ahead, Catherine. I'll ask my question afterwards.
We just have a question on whether the slides will be available on the town website.
I assume so. That's up to George, right?
They'll be available before noon tomorrow. Yeah.
I can give you a PDF, George, of the final version of this that might be helpful to you. So I have a question. You have zoning right now that, as I understand it, allows essentially 14 units an acre. Am I right about that, George?
That's correct.
If it turned out that the best way to design the site to allow multiple uses might need something more than that, or perhaps some other type of dimensional differences than what your zoning currently provides, is the town open to the possibility of using Chapter 40B to design the housing component of the project?
I'll just answer that. The town of Orleans is entertaining a so-called friendly 40B application right now. So I think that answers your question.
Okay, thanks. Just wanted to know how much dimensional flexibility we might have if we need it. Anybody else have anything to add who hasn't said anything yet?
One more in the chat.
Okay.
Comment to consider, given the sloping nature of the property, the demand for housing from seniors, why not consider an elevator building and underground parking or deck to accommodate multiple uses, housing and community center?
Bart, you want to field that one? Underground parking is pretty challenging.
Expensive.
Very expensive.
It's very expensive. To be honest, I didn't even think about that in this situation. It just seems like, I mean, I go through, you guys mentioned the bike path. I do a lot of bike ride and I go up and down that bike path all the time. And I could never picture a parking garage or underground parking situation in Orleans. It just doesn't seem like it would fit. But the tricky thing with that would be, you know, access would be from the high side. So you would actually have to get cars all the way down to the bottom to make them go back up. So again, it's you know, a lot of design issues, but and again, it depends on what happens there. So maybe it is parking underneath or something. If it becomes a bigger building of apartments or something of that. But yeah.
I mean, to be honest, I don't think it's realistic. I'm just going to say that. Nancy and then Marcia.
Yes, I'm a proponent of as much affordable housing is good for the site. But one thing we haven't really talked about is how it looks from the street. And the pictures that I see, I don't get the sense that it's connected and beautifully as part of the face of Route 6. It seems to be a lot of this kind of approach to it. And I think I'm just curious as what the face 6A, might be able to work a little bit more on that. So the first view with the apartment in the front gave a sense of stability or centering to it. The second view, there's no real center that gives you a visual from the street. The third one, I don't know what that's going to be and where the housing is going to be compared to the building. But I think we need to give it some stability from the street. And does that make sense to you?
Yep, it does. Thank you.
Yeah, it does. And again, you know, if it is a mixed use, then you're going to have more people coming there. You know, if it's a residential, then we don't want to have, you know, this big entrance that attract people that don't need to be there. So again, it does make sense. I think with the last concept, we're going to have a lot more parking if it does become a community center. So, you know, the front would be open a lot more to Route 6. You know, right now, the way the hotel is set up, there's a lot of space in the front that's just not getting used. So that gives us the opportunity to pull these main buildings a little bit closer to the road and have parking on the side, so it's not right on the street. So yeah, these are all things that we think about, and that's a good point. But yeah, so that entrances are important, whether it's mixed use, residential, or a community center.
I think we have time for one more question. Is there one, Catherine, in the chat or the Q&A?
There is one in the chat, but Marcia's hand is also raised.
Okay. Well, I think we'll take one more question. Marcia?
Yes, I mean, relating to the last few questions is the characteristics of the site. So it seems to crest in the middle and then drop fairly significantly toward the rail trail. Is that right? I mean, so part of it is as we do the design, and I don't know where big trees are and other environmental features, are there characteristics of the site, the environmental characteristics of the site, topographic, site view, that kind of stuff, that might give us some guidance as to how we design what we put where, kind of thing. So to the extent that we might have multifamily structures or townhomes, et cetera, and you can use the, I think Bart referenced that, use the topographic difference to advantage as we design the site.
Thank you.
Yep, that's definitely what we had in mind with these concepts. And you know, right now, I don't know if anybody's actually been through there, but you can almost drive all the way around the site now with access roads, and there's a spot that isn't connected, so you can't actually go all the way around, but you could currently drive a car to most of the site. So when we did these concepts, we try to locate the roads in a way that we're not making them too steep, or that there's too much site work that has to be done to build this. So yes, we do take those into account. And I don't know if I'd mentioned, you know, with some of these cottages, they might be, you know, a walkout where you walk in the first floor and on some, and you walk out the basement in the back on you know, on the other side of the house. And that helps with grading in situations like that as well.
So Kevin, I think we probably should turn this meeting back over to you folks. As I don't think we have time really to take any more questions this evening.
Well, I just want to thank you so much, Judy, and also to my fellow board committee members, Nancy and your Affordable Housing Committee, Alan, Affordable Housing Trust. This is moving Orleans forward at such a wonderful pace, considering so many comments and input. I know you continue it. As other people have put in information in the chat, do consider those. There's been a few others that have come in, but I think you're open, Judy, for even further feedback. Yes, all good. And George, again, thanks so much for you. I know you're juggling many things, but at this point, more work to do. Bart, thanks to you, Catherine, Judy. I think at this point, I will ask simply by a show of hands, so we minimize. We didn't have any votes taken, so just select board members. Motion to adjourn, please. Show of hands. Select board is adjourned. Nancy?
You're muted, Nancy.
Sorry. Affordable Housing Committee, show of hands to adjourn. Okay.
and trust. By a show of hands, we stand adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you. This was awesome. Thank you so much for your
Very
help.
much.